What's going on, folks? Today we're going to be talking about the concept of Noble Life Kingdom Reborn. This is an extremely unique game that I came across on Steam, and it currently has its playtest going till about Friday this week, the 17th. And the game essentially takes place in the 100 Years' War at the south of France. And the way that it works is that it's kind of like the game, if you've ever played it, called Yes, Your Grace, where you kind of start out as a settlement owner who is just coming back to their castle that has been attacked, and you have to make decisions to guide your citizens and your army, which doesn't start out as anything more than a couple of band of soldiers, and you have to kind of guide them to success and then rebuild the villages around your settlement alongside attacking other ones. Right now in the playtest, the combat system is not available, only the baseline of the decisions. So when you hit new game, right now you can see that you have different origins. Now the way that this part works is that a lot of the choices that you make take place in the throne room when you're talking to your citizens. So your origin is going to give you specialized options, like if you're dealing with more military based characters, as a knight you're going to have more options on their side, or if you're in a combat situation you'll have special options on that side as well. And then as an overseer, you might have more special options when you're dealing with people that are like villagers, maybe ones that are talking to you about accounting, like if you're dealing with finance, that sort of thing. And then of course, like the one here, I don't know how to fully pronounce that, that's more for like a religion based one. So if you're dealing with like the church, or if you're dealing with a faction that is like the Templars or the Pope, you're going to get more special options for this one as well. And then student, of course, that's self-explanatory. If you're dealing with anything like knowledge base, that's what you're going to have more special options in. So far, the knight, even as it says right here, the game doesn't have a combat system yet. For this reason, the origin is weaker than the other ones. I don't think it has, from what I was able to test, I don't think it has that many special options yet. I haven't seen any, really, I haven't noticed any at all in the playtest for Knight specifically. For Overseer, it seems to be the best one to start with right now, the one that I highly recommend for getting the best experience of the playtest. When I was testing out the other ones, I didn't really notice any other special options that they gave in the playtest. I think right now, the game basically starts you off as an Overseer either way, but it is not really going to make a difference as far as I've seen, at least in the playtest side. Once you get out of the playtest area, like once they develop more stuff, then at that point we might actually see those special options come into play. So you start off with making your name, estate name, city name, just like that, and then you have to design your shield border, or excuse me, your emblem. So what I normally do is I like to get this border right here. I love the fleur-de-lis icon. I don't know why, it's always been my top favorite, so I just normally go for this one here. And then I have been using the deer most often, but of course I do go for the flare as well. Don't really know how to pronounce that one either. I'm very terrible at pronouncing stuff, you'll come to find out. But after that, you can accept. The game is going to go ahead and start, and we'll be off to the races. All right, so we're starting off in the southern part of the Kingdom of France, like we talked about, the 100 Years' War. And right now, like I said, you're going to be coming back to your city that has been attacked. You don't know exactly why it's been attacked, but your job right now, at least, is to investigate it, or you can make a decision to help rebuild it. There's plenty of ways you can go about this, and we're going to talk more about that as we go through the dialogue that we're going to get into in a bit here. But what I like to recommend, at least for this early part, and especially when the full release for the game actually comes out, is what I'll probably do. We don't know exactly how this attack took place, but as you're talking to the villagers, as you're talking to the people, it's going to start to sound like the people that were attacking them knew exactly what the layout of your city was and knew exactly what to look for once they got inside. Because as they're describing it, like you can see the battering ram here, there was an enemy camp back there, there were some damaged siege engines, I believe, in the back there, but they were able to, so they had a couple engineers in their rank, and they were able to build these engines, and then when they started firing like the trebuchets, they were able to hit very key points, including an area inside of the keep that fully killed all of your council members except a couple. So it seemed like they really knew what they were doing. They knew what to look for, especially once they got inside. What I suspected, and still suspect from an early standpoint, is that we have a traitor in our midst, somebody that was feeding them information. What's even more suspicious is that when you are coming back here and you're talking to like your chancellor or whatever, assistant, it kind of tells you that they might have caught wind, or Roland might actually talk about it. Roland is our knight right over here, our Capitan, but he kind of sounds like they knew we were coming back and they decided to leave this area. before we got here, and it makes sense as to why, because the villagers that were here and the little detachment of garrison that we had here, they were able to hold a little bit. Like it wasn't a big detachment because we were off with our soldiers fighting in the 100 Years War, so nobody really expected an attack in this area of France. So we were kind of unprepared on that count. We did have a military man in defense of the city. He's been killed, but like, as you can see, we're just kind of going through the city and kind of taking heed of the damage. So the cool thing as the game progresses is that as we're building back up, you're going to see the progress actually a lot coming alive in the city itself. At least that's how it's going. That's how it's supposed to be. The trailer that they released on their Steam page is more of a concept trailer. You're not actually going to see anything like that happen in this playtest right now. It's going to stay in this damaged state. As a matter of fact, once you enter the keep, after this point, you're not really even going to be coming back to the village before this playtest ends. So this first kind of decision that you're asked to make is by the survivors. So they want you to help them with rebuilding, and you can go about this a couple of ways. And the thing that is nice about this game is it makes you think. So your decisions have gravity. You have to be sure of what you're choosing, and you can't help everybody, just like the loading screen will constantly remind you. So you have to make sure that whatever you choose, it's something that you're very comfortable with, and you know the consequences and the rewards alike. So what I could do here is I could immediately promise them that our military is going to help them rebuild. What that does, though, is that takes away from the military being able to defend the city. Personally, I think they could, well, okay, so if they're going to help them rebuild, they're more than likely going to have to take off the armor. The weapons can't work in armor. That's going to be very, very cost draining or counterproductive. So that's probably why Roland comes to us later and is like, we need these people to help defend the city. But that's one option. You can have them help rebuild the city. You can also have them focus more on defending the city and keeping order, so that people that might be inclined to rob might not do so. And the third option, which does require you to do a little bit of probing when you're talking to both Roland and I believe you have to talk to your advisor before this option pops up, which is what we're going to do in a second here. But what I'm going to do for right now is I'm going to say I need to get a good grasp on the situation first. I don't want to promise anything. And this is going to be very important as well, because even as we get through the playtest, which is going to consist of 2 rounds of decision making, you're going to notice that you really don't want to promise something and then go behind on your word later, or promise something that you may not be prepared to actually pay. We're making our way through the town now, and like I mentioned before, you start out with just this city, but when we get to round 2, because like I said, it's going to consist of 2 rounds, you are going to notice that there's villages that pay taxes. Of course, they pay gold tax, but they also pay in resources. So you're going to get visitors from these villages, like representatives, and you have to make decisions based around those lands as well. Sometimes they'll ask for food, building materials, gold. Sometimes they'll just ask for, maybe your army, like a general or something like that, to come over and help them defend. It's very interesting the way that this is going to work. So, and like I mentioned before, this game is very similar, or the concept of it is very similar to one called Yes, Your Grace. However, the difference I think that will take part in this game that isn't really present in Yes, Your Grace, because I did play it for about 15 to 20 hours one day, and I was trying to see if I could kind of get that experience out of that game after I played this playtest, because that's when I decided to play it. But with Yes, Your Grace, the only issue is that your decisions don't really feel, especially up until the wedding. If you haven't played it, I don't want to spoil what the wedding is or what happens, but up until the wedding and even afterwards, I would imagine it feels kind of forced. So like, no matter what decision you make, it is really going to play out in a very similar way. And this is something that happens in, RPGs even that have the option of multiple dialogue choices. Sometimes it will still play out in a very similar way or the exact same way, no matter what you choose, only slight differences. In this game, I think the concept is very interesting because the game itself is going to vastly go down a different path depending on what you decide. So like right now, what I can do is I can kind of ask Gascard here more about the situation and ask him if there's anything, you know, that stood out to him that was out of the ordinary. And you're able to get multiple different points of people's views, but this also opens up other dialogue options that can open up, you know, new paths down the chain later on. What I'm going to start talking about is kind of like getting a grasp of the situation. Here comes Roland bursting in. So like I was talking about, when you get into the throne room area, this is kind of where you're going to spend a big part of your game. Right now, as you can see, it's been pretty ransacked, and Gascard kind of talks about how while the fighting was going on outside, there was some looters that actually used ladders and ropes to get across into this area and loot this. I don't know how they managed to do that, but I guess they must have come in from the backside of the castle, which makes sense to a degree. But they pushed in too deep and they got caught by our guards, so they weren't able to like make off with everything successfully. But Roland as well, when you're asking him about how the battle went, he kind of talks, and I don't want to spoil too much of the dialogue, so that's why I'm kind of skipping through it alongside with, I played this multiple times. He's kind of telling you about how the battle went from his perspective. Well, no, actually he wasn't here, so he's not really telling it from his perspective, like kind of like what he heard from the soldiers. And then Gascard is kind of talking about how it went from his perspective. And then there's another guy in the back there, because these people are lined up ready to come meet with me. So there's another guy in the back there that's like a veteran who was injured in the fight, but he tells it from his perspective to a better degree because he was actually, you know, on the front lines. So he saw some stuff that Gascard wasn't able to. So this is the kind of first military decision we come across. Like I mentioned, this is Roland asking if the soldiers can just kind of focus on the defense of the city, security of the city, or if they're going to help rebuild the city. And I'll just give you a little spoiler. At the end of this playtest, at the end of the second round, what's going to happen is the English are going to come back. So what I think happened, and what kind of makes sense, is that they caught wind that you were coming back. They've already been trying to take this city, and they weren't able to fully take it because what little detachment of guards that we had here were still holding. So they more than likely wanted to come out of the city, give you a sense of false security, and then when you are like, you know, still rebuilding or kind of at your weakest, come back in and take it. I'm going to actually put the guard, and this option won't pop up, like I said, unless you talk to Gascard beforehand about the battle, along with, I believe, Roland, and ask him what his perspective was. So I'm going to put them on more of a investigation. Yeah, investigating the issue of the invasion kind of job, because I don't think that there are, because Roland, for example, he's a military man, so when he is initially talking to you here, he's saying, yeah, like, with all due respect, gentlemen, raids happen. He thinks it's just a normal raid. I don't think so. As you're talking to the veteran in the back, even, he talks about how they had in their army, they had a fairly sized army. Nobody knew they were coming. They actually raided a land just north of us, I believe it was north of us, before they got to us, and we didn't know anything about their attack because only rumors were coming out of that area during the time, and any scouts that we sent over there to kind of investigate the situation never came back. So and yeah, this is the Francosis that he's talking about, the guy in the back, that's the veteran. So he's kind of talking about how you probably want to support them, because otherwise the people that want to join the military in the future may not be so inclined to do so if they get injured and you're just not willing to support them. So it kind of, every decision that you make, like I said, kind of makes an impact on how the people see you, your relations go, and what does and what doesn't get rebuilt in your city. This first person, Jehan, he is more of the council and person that represents the villagers. So this guy is going to be asking you for more supplies and more grain for the villagers to rebuild and to feed them. The thing is about this as well is that your storehouses, the ones that weren't raided in this attack that he's asking you to pull these resources from, these resources were mainly reserved for the villagers in the event of a siege. So that's something to keep in mind, but also you can't, like I said before, you can't help everybody. So you have to be very sparing with your resources. I can decide if I want to give him half the resources that he's asking for or none at all. Of course, like I said, this will impact what happens in your city between the rounds. This will also impact how the villagers see you. So Gascard right here, he's going to point out what are the resources we have and how much it's going to cost to satisfy the villagers. So right now we have 450 quarts of grain, 250 bales of wood, and then 220 coins. 300 quarts of grain and 120 bales of wood would be required. That's a significant portion of your resources. right? So if you give them all of that now, there is going to be other people in that crowd back there that are going to ask for, specifically the last one, but also the veteran guy. They're also going to be asking for food and resources. You kind of have to pick and choose who you want to help, how much you want to help them, that sort of thing. Now, one thing to note about this guy is if you decide that you want to give them only half, then what might happen at the end of the round is you might get reports of some villagers robbing each other. So when you make that initial decision with Roland about having the guards defend the city, that can kind of counteract against that. But what I'm planning to do is going to make it to where we shouldn't get any reports of looting, because aside from us getting attacked, there was also another village nearby that the last guy is going to talk to us about that got attacked as well. So when they got attacked, they came over to our city and they put all their citizens in our village, or I'm sorry, our village area, and their village got destroyed. So I can decide, and this is the reason why I'm only going to be giving Jihan half resources, is because what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to the people that lost their village, because they actually came from a lumber village that was a pretty significant part of our resource income, because other than them there's only one other lumber village that's going to be supplying you right now. So lumber is incredibly important. You probably missed it, but Guescard mentioned how bales of food, those are more easily replaced than the building materials, right? So the grain isn't as big of an impact as the building materials. Of course, you do need the food, especially in the event of a siege, but the building materials are also extremely valuable, potentially more so, even though I'd probably pit food over building resources. But right now in this specific instance and in this game, building resources seem more rare. So I'm gonna have him describe everything in detail, like what he saw. And I believe Jahan, alongside the veteran in the back, also mentioned how they had siege engineers. So this was a more controlled attack. Like siege engineers, they've built up siege engines, and they had a good amount of people in their army, including quite a few veteran units. So I'm gonna go ahead and say a good ruler should help his subject, but I can't squander my not so large resources, so you'll get less help. Or I could say you'll only receive food, you'll receive as much as you need. You only receive building materials, which that's not going to help them a whole lot. I mean, they can build, but they won't have food. So I'm going to say you'll get less help. So I'm going to say you'll get half of what you need. And then of course, Jihan is going to say it's not enough. I understand, right? They're going to be a little pissed, but what I'm going to do later is going to help with that, because they don't want the villagers that came here, the ones that came from the burned down lumber village, they don't want them to stay here. They want us to focus our resources on our village. So if I let the other village stay here, then that's when I believe our villagers are going to start robbing people in this scenario, right? So since I have my guard investigating the situation, I'm going to have those people leave my city, those other villagers, but I'm also going to give them some resources so they can head back to that lumber village and rebuild. So after the first round, Guescard comes back in, because you go to bed after that, and kind of talks about what the map is going to show you. And the map itself is like the area where you can kind of dish out what taxes you want to get from the villages. Man, this guy has such a majestic head of hair. But yeah, you can kind of see all your different villages in the surrounding area and what you want to do as far as like the taxes go, your noble friendly territories basically. And more than likely, this will also be where we see the enemy faction territories as well when those pop up. So we might be able to stage raids from here, potentially, might be able to. And as far as I've seen for the game, when I was able to read it, it said that we will get at least like 15 hours of campaign. So that's not going to be a whole lot in hindsight when you take into account that the story can branch off in many different directions, alongside the fact that there's probably going to be a lot of side action. It actually could extend itself a lot longer. Personally, I wish this kind of game could end up being something that could go on forever. To be honest, I would love it if this was like more of a sandbox game, kind of like Mountain Blade, and it could just keep going and going and going. But honestly, there's only, I'd imagine they can only go as fast as they can implement that content. It's not something that you can kind of generate content on your own, if that makes sense. Like not in a sandbox sense like Mountain Blade, where you can put all the baseline mechanics in, but the player can, basically just keep going on their own. So I totally get it. But yeah, so what you're going to see here is what we can do with the campaign map, so we can kind of get a sense of the different villages, like their tax amounts. As you're looking at this map as well, and you look over at this this portion here, you can kind of see what their current growth is. So their growth would be this number right here, so the +10. This is the only lumber village that we have currently, like I mentioned. But in the last round, when the other villagers came, because I said the last one would be them, a representative for their town, this one specifically is the one, I actually gave them some resources to go back up there and rebuild. So that's why I said I would only give our villagers half, and then I'd give a majority of the rest to these guys, because if I let them stay in our town, yes, rebuilding would have been faster, so there are benefits there, and it might help monetarily in the long run. It would make the other villagers unhappy, and it would altogether be a bigger strain on our resources regardless. So that's why I told them to go back. So what I'll do here is I'm going to just put 1 coin over on theirs, because as you put these coins on there, as you can see, it impacts the mood per se, but it can also impact the growth. So right now in this early stage, because you know our settlement's been raided, we're dealing with, you know, some pretty heavy stuff here, and this village right here, this is like one of my most lucrative ones right now. So they not only produce quite a bit of wood, but also quite a bit of tax. So I'm gonna go ahead and I hate to do this, but I'm gonna put a little bit of a higher tax on these dudes. And one of the representatives that comes in next, he's actually going to ask, because he comes directly from this village, and he's going to ask for lower taxes for a certain amount of time, right? But that's not going to be very good for me. I need to get my city rebuilt up. So what I'm kind of going to do for him is I'm going to say that right now the taxes are going to remain the same for these dudes, but when we get to the winter months, which is actually pretty smart, I didn't even realize in my first playthrough, I didn't even realize this would be an option. But when we get to the winter months, I'm going to tell him that his taxes will be waived, right? Because during the winter, that's going to be a big time for them trying to survive. And if they aren't being taxed, that's going to alleviate their situation quite a lot more, right? And then by that point, we should have a lot of our stuff rebuilt already, so it's not gonna really be that big of a deal. So yeah, that should be fine. But I think I've got everything set up as far as these coins go. So that's the majority of the villages that I have access to at the moment. There will be other ones that pop up, like in this section, for example, but right now we don't have access to them. And then, like I said, when we get to the point where we're going to be declaring war on people, then this might be the map where those, you know, that kind of thing shows up and we can declare from there. So that'll be pretty interesting, to say the least. Looks like there should be a village over there, but no, there's not. This looks like a swan icon, or like a swan or a dove. So I'm gonna go ahead and exit out of this here. These are my orders. That's right. Cool. Okay. So what's going to happen, and you kind of see this in the trailer too, is when we get to the end of this second round, the scout is going to come in and mention, like I say, that the English are back. What I think is going to happen, and this shows up in the trailer, is that you're going to be able to place different icons around your settlement, just to kind of plan out your defense, similar to how you're doing the settlement map. You're going to be able to do the same thing in a sense on the military map, and it looks really cool. I love the way that looks. I'm really interested to see how the combat aspect plays out in regards to that. And there's also going to be different kinds of battles, like field battles, that you can engage in and make decisions on. Siege defense, potentially siege attacks. What's going on here? And he's going to tell us that soldier went running out. Yep, English are coming. It's another attack. And that is where the playtest ends. So you kind of get a feel of how the game itself works. The decisions you make, they're going to have a lot to do with the success or the failure of your city. And I'm really interested to see how this all goes, because unlike the game like Yes Your Grace, like I mentioned, I feel like the gravity of the decisions are real here. These decisions play out in a completely different way depending on what you choose, and it's going to feel like an important decision. So like in the full version, main story, minimum of 15 hours. I really wish that was longer, but honestly, with how complex the game is, it's not surprising that it's only planned to be that long for the full version. multi-threaded storyline with dozens of diverse characters and intertwining consequences for the player's action. Main city drastically changing. You can kind of see some of this in the trailer, how it will change as you develop it and in what way you develop it. Management also via maps, mock-ups, letters, advisor system, and personal city visits. Highly immersive, expansive economic systems with dozens of tables and UI screens. Unique, elaborate special events, balls, diplomatic meetings, and weddings, which sounds really fun. You're also going to be able to, like form alliances with other areas, which will be really nice. Probably going to be able to marry somebody eventually as well. Ruling a city under siege in real-time command during an assault, and player-commanded cavalry raids. Right, so that's going to be really cool. I really love the concept of this game. I hope that they are able to take it far. I can't wait to see what comes of it, but for now, that's going to be everything to showcase about the game. Highly recommend checking out the playtest if you haven't had a chance already. It's available for 3 more days. And definitely keep tabs on this game. Whenever they have another playtest or whenever they do get the ability to start selling the game, I'm definitely going to jump in on it immediately. But that's all for now, folks. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.